Hi, Adner.
Hi, Luke. How are you?
Oh, hold on. What have I got on here? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can properly. Can you hear
Very
me?
good tonight. How can I? How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Pretty tired, but and busy, but quite okay.
Good, good. Well, maybe not so good with the tired, but good with the busy bit.
Yeah, that's it. That's true. Can you see my desktop properly?
Yes, the fundamental principles. Yeah, for correct positioning.
That's awesome.
Yes, indeed. We have a few early birds in.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. You're very welcome. Feel free to join in for a little bit of a pre-conversation here before we get started. Not everybody may have access to microphone and camera on their desktops. So yeah, that's they may not be able to join in, but feel free to add anything into the chat there, guys. But yeah, we'll wait until 1 before we kick off.
Or they might be shy also. So
there could be that also. So tired, Adner? Correct? Adner, have you a young baby in the house?
Sorry?
Have you got a baby in the house? A child? A newborn?
No, I will start traveling next week. So.
Okay. Who am I thinking that has recently had a child? It obviously isn't yourself. Right. So where are you off to next week?
I'm going to Spain, to south of Spain. So the borders are already open. So I'm gonna spend the full week working there. So I'm driving. I'm not flying. So it's gonna be easier from my side.
Yeah. Good. Well, best of luck with all of that.
Oh, thank you. How there? Are things opening already, or still everything closed?
We're is it next week? I think it's the next Monday, the 10th. We can travel within the country. The numbers are definitely falling. They're like, we had our lowest day in the hospitals, and I think it's in like 6 months or something like that. So yeah, the vaccination rollout is happening. A little bit slower than everybody would like, but we're not as fast as what's going on in the UK. It's really, it's been, they're miles ahead of everybody as far as I can see. But it's happening. The vaccinations seem to be there seems to be a good load of them there ready to be administered, and they're under the 60s, the 50. I think they're probably registering like 58-year-olds or something like that now, and it's every day. It's like one day is 58, next day is 57, next day is 56. So yeah, by June we should be, should have a really, really good handle on vaccinations. So yeah, and hopefully back to some sort of normality.
Yeah, I hope so also.
Yeah, back on the planes to Portugal for holidays.
Yeah, we are almost on the summer, so.
Yeah. How's the weather with you guys? Is it nice at the moment?
It's pretty good, to be honest. This week we had like 20 degrees, so it's starting to getting high. So it's pretty good. Today it's a little bit cloudy, but even the temperature it's like 18 or almost 20. So it's pretty good, nice. As you can see,
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've had typical Irish spring weather. We've had last weekend, or is it last weekend, the weekend before? We've had a really, really good, loads of nice weather. But this week we've had hailstorms and and wind and rain is back. But again, it's the sun is shining here this afternoon. It's nice again. So that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
So again, welcome guys. There's a few more joining in. Welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us today. We have Adner Silva is from Quantum Rehab stroke Stealth is going to be speaking today around as you can see, the fundamental principles of correct positioning. So yeah, anybody feels like having a bit of a chat here before we will be starting at 1, or maybe just we might give it a couple of minutes after 1. But anybody feels like, or anybody want to talk about any cases or anything that they have there at the moment, any problems around positioning or so on, feel free to either chat away or put it into the comments box, and we can have a chat about it and see if we can help out.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, hello.
Paddy, one of the OTs from Dublin West here.
Hey Paddy, how are you?
Good, thanks. Yourself?
Not so bad at all. Not so bad. Yeah, you're very welcome, Paddy.
Very much. How are you
We're
guys
just
doing
saying there,
today?
Paddy. Pardon?
How are you guys doing today?
Doing well indeed. Yeah, not long in from I was out doing an assessment there this morning, so just not long at the desk. So yeah, looking forward to this the next couple of hours here. But as I said, Paddy, just to everybody there that's joining, very welcome to everybody. We'll give it to a couple of minutes past 1 o'clock, and then we kick off. But if anybody has any bits and pieces they want to discuss, sort of they can chat away here now, or add it into the chat box down on at the bottom of the page there. Yeah, please feel free to do so.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Molly. Yeah, we've got to read that. Like, how much? How much we got?
So, guys, you are all again very welcome to everybody that has joined there now, and again, welcome to everybody that's been waiting here for a few minutes. It's just coming 1 o'clock here now. Adner, I'll let you make a call on it if you want to go ahead on it, and sure we can make a start. Well, just a little bit of housekeeping, guys. If everybody could just keep their mic muted whenever Adner is speaking, and then if you want to sort of come in with anything there, just unmute yourselves and then mute yourselves back again. But please do. We'd love to hear a bit of the conversation and discussion around any elements that or clients that you're having any positioning problems with. So yeah, Adner with again we welcome Adner. Adner is coming from Stealth Products, from Quantum, so it's Stealth Products. So yeah, I'll hand you over to Adner, and thank you very much.
Thank you. So good afternoon all. My name is Adner, as you can see there. I did this presentation with my colleague Philippe, and that's why I'm introducing him also here on the presentation, because this is a combination of efforts that we did from a lot of years of working on the field doing assessments. To be honest, this is a combination of knowledge between me, Philippe, and a lot of people combined through a lot of years. I'm working on this industry for 18 years, more or less, 17, 18 years. Philippe, it's working like 22 or 23 years already on the industry. And usually we used to do assessments all days, full days. So when we start this project for this presentation, I knew at that time that Philippe had a lot of knowledge, and I wanted to combine a lot of the things that I learned with him and put everything on a presentation. So this is a pretty massive presentation. What I tried to do on the presentation, it was to get the knowledge from Philippe, from the parts that I didn't knew, get it here, but visually apply it in a way that it's going to be easy to understand. I try to do my presentations pretty visually. We segment the presentation in 3 parts because this is a really big presentation. On the 3 parts that I did, I might tell you that the first one, it's going to be a little bit more technical, so with a lot of much more text, but then it will start to be much more visual, so we can see some examples and some things that we had that I hope it's going to be pretty common for you guys. Any question, like Luke said, any question or doubt that you have, please put your mics on and just interrupt, and we can just interact a little bit more. Obviously, this is not 100% for all the cases. We don't bring the solution, the Columbo's egg, we could say, for all the cases. But we have a lot of things here that we will see. It's going to be pretty common to you, and we hope that we can have something new to show you, okay? So about the fundamental principles for correct positioning, we divided this in 5 menus, okay? A small introduction. Yeah, sorry, Lorna? No, okay. So we divided. First one, it's going to be an introduction. We will talk about the assessments, how to do it, how to properly do it, the posture tendencies that we might have. We will talk also about primitive reflexes and how they can mess around with sitting and positioning, and also sitting and positioning systems that we know, leading for the last part, a totally different presentation only about products, okay? So the first one, it's going to be the introduction. Every time that we talk about sitting and positioning, we start talking about the pelvis. What is the pelvis? What is the things that we need to understand about the pelvis, about movements, postures and stuff, because it's one of the main parts for a correct sitting and positioning. I always say that this is not 100% for all the cases. 90% of the cases we might begin with the pelvis when we are starting to do an assessment, for example, but I have a lot of cases that I start with the foot, for example, or with the head, depending on the tone, depending on the pathology, depending if they have or not some retained primitive reflexes. There are so many things on the positioning structure that we are talking about that it's going to be pretty impossible to say, well, we should always start with the pelvis. That's not correct. Knowing that the pelvis is pretty important, probably it's going to be 90 or 95% of the times that we will start working with the pelvis. And that's why I think it's pretty important to start showing what is the pelvis, where are the ASIs, where are the PSIS, where are the ITs, because this will have a lot to do with a proper sitting and positioning, okay? So positioning principles, this is attached to treatment. Usually the intervention, it's a part of treatment regimen, and must be done in conjunction with a team. I always say with a team because when I worked on the fields, I was a lucky guy working with pretty young teams of PTs and OTs and speech therapists, and also some doctors, physiatricians, that I learned really a lot till today, and I'm constantly learning, to be honest. But we had the chance to share a lot of knowledge, me about the products and the way how to apply properly the products, and they with all the knowledge about seating and positioning, all the pathologies, all the tones and stuff that I learned on all these years on the fields. So we need to work as a team with OTs, PTs, physiatricians, but also with caregivers, with the parents themselves, with the teachers, and so on. Because this is an effort that if we are just thinking about working alone, we will lose everything in the way. Okay. So intervention, it's not a quick fix. It involves monitoring problems and the effectiveness of solutions and results. So we are constantly changing the way that we think, the way that we look to the products, the way that we apply also the products. So usually,
or even want to get mine because I think the connection's better off to work from this.
We tend to have the need to understand everything properly, to make an intervention when it's needed. So the client changes, so does the positioning system. So we need to think, depending on the positioning system, that if the client change, we need to change the products. And not all the products allows us to do that type of change. If we are talking, for example, about molded seats or molded vests, sometimes it's going to be pretty challenging to do something on the way, but we need to think at least on that way, that we need to be able to change the system within the client. So postural control, pressure distribution and function. So when I start working like 18 years ago on these fields, we tend to look to the client and try to apply the same products or the same angles or the same way that we used to learn at that time, like the 90 degrees. And obviously on the way, we learned that we have so many other things that we need to take care, like breathing, like swallowing, like the digestive function, or the function itself about movement and reaching and stuff like that. So we need to look at it as an all when we are doing something about sitting and positioning. So positioning usually leads us to two problems: improving postural control and providing a proper pressure distribution. So products will be probably the thing that we need to look at to get everything settled on the proper way. Okay, sometimes we need to choose. Sometimes we have a problem because we are trying to achieve a proper posture, but we are losing function. So we always try to look to the product also, or we try to change the products also when we are looking inside on the R&D. For example, we are trying to look to the products in a way that allows us to do everything when we are looking for sitting and positioning. So function, it's one of the things that now we really take a really good look when we are looking for products and sitting and positioning. So postural control and pressure distribution. I had a client with a cerebral palsy. Most of my clients, yeah. Question? No, just a microphone open. Okay. So postural control. I'm sorry, I'm hearing here some feedback.
Guys, can we keep the mic muted?
She's Gil, is she?
Please.
Okay. So postural control, the improvement in postural control is applicable to people who decrease the ability to maintain sitting positioning and or limited functional abilities. due to muscle weakness, abnormal tones, or orthopedic deformities. Improvement in postural control often begins with proximal control and is key to stabilizing the pelvis. I had a client with a CP that he used to drive his wheelchair with his left foot. But to do it, he had to be seated with a hip rotation, hip obliquity, with a trunk rotation also, with his arms totally bent. But that was the way that he was able to get function on his left leg to drive the chair with his feet. So when I try to look just for the postural control and for the pressure distribution for the client, actually I was able to sit it on a proper positioning. But then I asked him to drive and he just told me it's impossible because I had a lot of belts around him to keep him pretty well seated, but then the function was totally lost. So when we are looking also for pressure distribution, we are trying to do some prevention. Some of the times we need to make sure that we will be able also to not get out the function of the clients. We always talk about prevention, correction, and accommodation. And the positioning intervention can be categorized in three general goals: the prevention, correction, / alignment, or accommodation. I always say correction / alignment because depending on the markets that I'm working with, sometimes correction, it has to do with surgery. So it's a pretty sensitive expression that I cannot use depending on the country that I'm working with. So when I'm talking about correction here on the presentation, I'm meaning alignment or postural alignment of the clients. So we always need to look for these three general goals: prevention of abnormal postures, alignment of abnormal postures also, flexible orthopedic deformities and treatment correction, or accommodation when we already have some fixed orthopedic deformities that lead us to a kind of products that they are a little bit more limited in terms of changing on the future. So what are the positioning principles? First of all, dynamic instead of static. So we always need to think on the client itself, like he will need to change during the day. So if he needs to change, we need to provide a system that allows him to do a certain amount of movements that allow him, for example, to breathe properly, to swallow properly, or to move a certain body segment, for example, on a proper way. So I'm not talking about dynamic systems. I'm talking about some dynamism that we can apply with the products that we are getting to the clients that allows them to have a certain amount of movements, posture and dynamics by nature. So as I was telling, during the day, each individual uses different postures and positionings. So dictated by the environment, activities, or the people who is interacting with the client, they will need to change during the daily activities. Usually, they also have some problems or posture problems during the day if they are not allowed to change. So I have a lot of clients that we try to make some restriction, for example, from the feet. So we have some belts over there, but then they are trying to work with a communication board, for example, and they cannot because they need to be a little bit more free to get some function for speech, for example. So the goal of therapeutic intervention is to maximize the number of body movements and positions that each person may have to use correctly during the day. So sometimes I have clients that to work with a certain software, for example, they have the need to have the head totally fixed, but that's just for an amount of time. If they are working with the software, for example, and they need to be restricted with the head to work with the software, that's okay. But then when we stop, release the client and let him just do what they are used to do. let them be free. As we are exactly the same way. We don't like to be stuck on a way that we cannot move. So we need to think about them exactly the same way. So positioning interventions should facilitate that kind of goal. So we need to choose a proper product that allows us to do this as maximum possible. So obviously we need to think about dynamism when we are looking to the products. We also need to change when they are growing or gaining weight, for example, or if they have a surgery and they will change physically, for example, we need also to think about changing the product accordingly to that need. So what is a person optimal position? Okay, what is? We need to get something that allows them to be on a proper way for eating, for example, for object manipulation. If they are totally fixed and they cannot move the arms, for example, to reach or to grab something, so we need to make sure that they are at least allowed to do that. For communication, as I was telling, a lot of times we need some fixation. A lot of times with a lot of fixation, they are not allowed to use their own communication or the communication devices. Mobility or the ability to learn. I have a lot of clients that when I get the clients on the first time, they had so many products around them that they were constantly fighting the products, constantly. And the therapist was also complaining a lot of times that just because of the product itself, because they are fighting against the products and all the things that they have around them, that they were not able to learn, okay? Just because they were so focused on trying to get out from there, that every activity that they were trying to do with clients, they were not able to do it. So sometimes, and I always say this, I always look to the product as this, and my company usually, I hope that they don't hear me a lot because we need to sell, but I always try to say that sell the less possible product for the best outcome or goal that you have for the clients. We don't need to sell a lot of products just because we need to sell. We need to sell the proper products just to make sure that all the function and all the things that we have around the goals about the client, it's going to be the best outcome of all. So try to use the less products possible with the best achievement of the goal that we are looking for. So looking for a good positioning, comfortable and practical, increases the ability to move and also helps third-party persons for safer transportation. As I was talking in the beginning, a big part of the team, it's going to be caregivers. Because a lot of times we forget the caregivers or the people around the clients that we need to teach properly how to use the products, how to properly seat the client within the products, because we are making an effort to make an assessment, to apply a proper product to get the best outcome of the client. And if we don't teach the people who will work on a daily basis with the products, we will totally lose the goal of the assessment or the product itself. And a lot of times that will lead us to a much higher problem on the future. Because a lot of times the misuse of the product itself might lead us to even a worse physical problems or other type of problems with the clients. So what are the positioning goals? The provision of a good adapted positioning system, it will have a huge impact on function. So health and quality of life directly or indirectly through, so motor control facilitate, also the symmetrical development of the skeleton. I always compare the seating system with the bonsai trees. So if you are familiar with the bonsai trees, the small trees that the Japanese do or work with, we always try to bend a part of the bonsai tree to redirect that tree, for example, for a certain way. So we need to think about the seating system that if we apply it improperly, we are facilitating a deformity. So it's going to be also our responsibility to make sure that we are applying properly some lateral controls, for example, or a head control, or a back support, or a cushion. Everything that we apply on the product will have an impact on the seating and positioning of the clients. Even the way that I sit the client on the system will have a huge impact. So if they are dependent and if I sit them improperly, they will be seated full day improperly. So that will get something on the future that we are not expecting, and we should. So prevent contractures, pressure ulcers. We are dividing this in prevention and treatment because some of the times you already have some pressure ulcers, and we need to make sure that the product that we are using allows us to do a proper treatment, but also not getting a bad impact when we are doing the treatment for the pressure ulcers. So prevent respiratory problems, facilitate cognitive and social development, improve the function of the digestive system. This is something that we start considering really a lot these years, because some of the times we had some problems because of pressure. The improper way of the trunk was getting a lot of pressure, and we had a lot of digestive problems just because of the improper seating system that we had for that type of clients. So facilitate day-to-day activities, improve comfort, and increase seat tolerance. About seat tolerance, I think it has to do also on the way that we are doing the assessments. Why am I saying this? Sometimes people think that an assessment should have like 5 minutes because we are quite busy. We don't have a lot of time. So we need to do it as fast as possible to make sure that we go there, we apply the product, everything is settled, so we can make a prescription and later on get the product. So depending on the cases, it might be okay. Sometimes might not be okay. I had a lot of clients with physical deformities, for example, that to do an assessment, for example, I took a full morning, and the therapists knew that to do a molded seat on the way that we were doing here, I would take at least 3 hours. Not because I'm a slow guy working, but just because the seat tolerance, it was one of the things that we need to make sure that we had for that type of client. A client with the need of a molded seat, we need to make the molds itself around the client with the proper positioning that we are allowed to do. But then when we make the mold, we need to make sure that the client will tolerate the posture that we are trying to achieve. Okay, so when we have already some deformities, for example, that we can accommodate with the product to get the proper pressure release and stuff, usually we try to keep an alignment that doesn't allow us to be even worse in the future. But then we need to make sure that the client will tolerate that. And if we do an assessment of 10 minutes, for example, everything is okay. But then when we apply the final products, after half an hour, for example, the client is constantly complaining. And with a molded seat, sometimes we have the ability to do some heat on the product, and we can unbend or bend a little bit more depending on the product that we are talking about. But that was just because we didn't look for the tolerance of the client on the product itself. So try to make sure that when you apply a product on a certain way, when you try to apply a pressure on a certain body segment, for example, that you have sufficient time to see what is the tolerance of the client to that product. So then, obviously, facilitate the caregiver's work. So once again, we need to have products that hopefully they will be easy to work with. Because if they are not pretty easy to work, then the caregivers or the parents or the teachers will not spend the enough time to look to the product on the proper way or to sit the client on the product on the proper way. So promote mobility within the system and outside the system as a whole. So postural control, obviously, we look a lot to the pelvis. Once again, it doesn't mean that we always will start with the pelvis, but we look a lot to the pelvis because most of the weight on a dependent client will be on the pelvis during the day. We will look for a proper correction or alignment. And then depending, we might do some prevention or some accommodation. So depending if we have some fixed, partially fixed or flexibility on the hip. And then we are always trying to achieve the best function for that type of client accordingly to the goals that we have. And this is it for the introduction, okay? So then we look for the assessment. So a traditional assessment, we need to get the user history. This is one of the things that we always try to get to ourselves to understand how the user, what type of products they were using, if they already had some problems about respiratory or breathing or swallowing problems, for example. And we try to get all the information that we might have. The skeletal deformities, if we have some or not. The range of motion limitations, we always need to make sure that we understand properly the ROM, the range of motion, because some of the times, knowing this, we can start preparing the seating system on a way that it's going to be much more easy for us to do the assessment and to apply the products for the user. Primitive reflexes, this is something that we will talk on the last part of this presentation, on the third part. There are a lot of things that we need to consider when we are talking about sitting and positioning. And sometimes we think it might be a primitive reflex. It is not. Sometimes we don't think it's gonna be, and it is. So we will focus much more on that on the last part of the presentation. Balancing reactions. A lot of times we have some balancing reactions that we need to make sure that it will not happen, or we need to consider if they have some balancing reactions when we are applying the product. Muscular tone, so pathologies, the knowledge about the pathology itself or the muscular tone of that client will have a huge impact on the product that we are selecting for them. Function, so the fine and thick function, oral, motor skills and speech. Sensitivity problems, sometimes they might be related to primitive reflexes or not. So we need to consider also some sensitivity problems, some skin problems that we already might have, self-care capacity. So this is not only for totally dependent users. Sitting and positioning is for all type of users. Prostheses, if they are wearing some or if they are in need or if they will have some on the future. Transport, nowadays we consider a lot the way that clients are transported because we need to think on the product that allows us also to interact with the transport on a daily basis. So the environment, where will the user work with the system? It's going to be at home, on school, at work, on all the places. Should we have one system for home, another system for the work? So we need to consider everything around it. And once again, obviously, it's a team effort to know all the things about the environment of the client itself. So what are the problems with the current system? When we get the client on the first time, what are the problems that we already have? Because we need to make sure that it's not going to be repeated on the next seating and positioning system. Other tech needs to support. So what do we need to apply on the system, for example, for speech, for example, a board, a communication board or software, and can we interact, for example, with the technology that we already have to the technology that user is already using? So we need also to consider that. So this is a small way of measuring the clients. Sometimes we have these to be filled in on the assessment, sometimes we don't. We have a ton of these small boards to take the measures. For us as a company, obviously, as much accurate we get these type of measurements, we can get the proper products for the client, obviously. I have a lot of different markets. I work through all the Europe, and I have some markets that they just not provide measurings. They just ask for the measurings of the products. I have markets that they send us all the measures of the clients. We are trying to achieve a level inside our company. We are not yet there, but we are trying to achieve a level that allows us already to prepare the products on a certain way that you will just have to do some fine adjustments when you get the products. It's going to take time. We are still on the internal training about everything. It's going to be, once again, a team effort to get all the knowledge in. But as more accurate you can get the measurements in the future, will have a huge impact also on the way that the product it's going to be sent to our dealers. Okay, so it's going to be.
Are you what do you call it, looking at the international language and the adoption of it across the the company?
Yeah, to be honest, this is a process. This is a learning process. For example, with UK market, we are learning a lot about, obviously, the type of language that we need to use. I can tell you, for example, armrests and foot rests, nowadays we are not using it anymore. It's going to be arm supports and foot supports, and all of these type of different language. We are getting some inputs from different markets, and we are trying to get something to be standardized. But obviously each subsidiary probably will have their own for their own markets, So, but we are looking at it at least. So all the inputs that you might send us, it's going to be pretty welcome. Okay. So level of seating scale. So we have a lot of different seating scales. Some, depending on the markets, they are working with 1, 2, or 3. But what do we need to get with the seating scale? It's this type of knowledge that you have there, those kind of questions. So if it is impossible to seat number 2 supported from the head down and so on. So the scale, it's pretty open, so you can use it. This is online, this is free. Knowing this type of knowledge allows us also to understand the type of client that we are talking about. So it's good for us as a manufacturers. It's going to be good for dealers also when they are looking for the system itself for that particular client. Then we go for the supine evaluation and the seating evaluation. So once again, it's going to depend a lot on the markets. Here in Portugal, it's quite simple. We have some places that allows us to work directly with the clients, they allows us to make the assessment within clients and touch the client on the way that we are doing the assessment and feeling the client on the product itself. And we have some other institutions, for example, that they don't allow us to work directly with the clients. So depending on the markets, depending on the clients, this is what we need to make sure that we are doing this type of assessments to make sure that we will have yes or no, some physical limitations when we are trying to create a seating system for that particular client. So about pelvic mobility, we need to understand the movement for a posterior pelvic tilt. Is it fixed or is it flexible? Nowadays, we are getting a new situation in between, okay? Nowadays, we don't say it's fixed or flexible. Why? Because we learned on the process that probably most of the cases, it's going to be between. It's going to be partially fixed or partially flexible. Sometimes the range of movement, we have some restrictions of movement. So we should say on the past, oh, this is fixed because we are moving the pelvis, for example, and the trunk, it's also moving. But most of the times, it's going to be partially fixed. So we have a small part of movement, but it's not totally flexible. So now we are adding a new one in between. So it's going to be fixed, partially fixed, or flexible. And on the cushion presentation that we did, this is a new presentation that we did also with some study cases and some also scientific numbers that we had for our cushions. We learned that pretty much of the cases, they are in between. They are not totally flexible or fixed. They are partially flexible. So we need to make sure that we do this type of assessment to understand how is the pelvis moving for posterior pelvic tilts or anterior pelvic tilts. The same for pelvic rotation and the same for pelvic obliquity. So to understand the trunk posture, if they have a kyphosis or not, if they have a scoliosis or not. As you can see, on the first draw on the upper side, you can see just a pair of hands. So one person can do it. Most of the times for the scoliosis, once again, this is a team effort. We have a therapist, for example, fixing the hip, and we have another therapist just moving the trunk to understand if we have some flexibility or not. Then we go for the seating evaluation. Why? Because a lot of times when we are on the supine, we can see things that we were not seeing on the seating evaluation. And also exactly the same on the opposite way. When we are not seeing on the supine, we can see it on a different way on the seating evaluation. Seating evaluation usually takes two people to do it on a proper way. And once again, we are trying to look for anterior pelvic tilts, posterior pelvic tilts, rotation or obliquity, and then kyphosis, scoliosis, and then the exceptions for windswept deformity, for example, or if we have already some rib hump, for example. So when we have already deformities that we need to accumulate and make sure that we have the proper weight distribution to prevent pressure ulcers. So as a conclusion, on the conclusion, we need to think that usually we used to say 90, 90, 90 to get it. And today everybody knows that this is not the correct way of looking for sitting and positioning. We need to look for the natural patient posture, stabilize the pelvis or trunk to follow, accumulate fixed deformities, obviously, correct or align flexible deformities within reason and function. So once again, look for the tolerance of the client when we are applying the products. Consider security and goals. Choose the most versatile equipment possible and consider that rehabilitation is changing. Once again, when I did this presentation, I truly believe even now that I did my live presentation, because this is probably all of the knowledge that I have about sitting and positioning combined with my colleagues' knowledge also applied on one presentation. But we are so constantly learning that we already know that this is not, for example, a fixed or flexible positioning. We have a between. So once again, this is the proof that everything is totally changing, and we need sometimes to change also the presentation accordingly to the things that we are learning. So all the inputs, all the information that we get from you, from therapists, doctors, patients themselves, we try to get that learning and change everything accordingly to the needs. So once again, consider also the caregiver. I like to highlight these because most of the times the problems that we have, it's the lack of use of the products itself. So we have a lot of issues, a lot of challenges on the field just because people don't know how to properly use the products, and then we will find problems. And now we are going for the most interesting part of the presentation, or one of the most interesting parts. So as you can see, this is going to be much more visually, and we will talk about the posture tendencies. So now we are starting to show much more about the way of things are happening and how can we do something to help. So when we are looking for a chair or an user, we need to consider a lot of different things. As you can see, we have a pretty nice design of a chair. That doesn't mean it's going to be the best one for the user, okay? So primary support. So we always talk about primary support, the basis. It might be a manual base, power base, it doesn't matter. That's going to be the primary support. So secondary support, it's going to be everything that we can apply on the primary support, like belts, cushions, back supports, head supports, and so on. So we need to consider the wheel size. Once again, it doesn't matter if it is a manual or a power base. We need to consider the wheel size, about obstacles, comfort, and so on. The back height. We need to consider the seat depth and the seat width. We need to look for the foot plate's height, for example, the foot plate size, arm supports height, recline angle, tilt angle, knees angle, and foot supports angle. So all of these situations, when we are looking for a primary support, when we are doing an assessment, we need to consider from the first moments. Okay, when we are looking to the client, we need to consider obviously the pelvis, the trunk, the head, and the lower extremities, because all of these four segments that we are looking for, I'm not talking about the arms, but these four segments will be probably the most important to look at when we are looking for a product. When we try to combine these, this is where sometimes we have a lot of problems. Well, if we are not taking care about the depth, the angles that we have here, then as you can see, we will have a lot of different problems. So what are the deformities that we are looking at? Flexible deformities, and they might be clinical or pathological or technical. So the clinical or pathological, they are skeletal deformities. They arise from pathological reasons. And the technical, it's because the product, it's not properly assessed for the client or applied for the client, and they have those technical deformities. And then the fixed or installed deformities. Once again, in between, we will have the partial flexible deformities. So those ones are the ones that gonna help me through this presentation. So I'm presenting to you all people that will help us on the presentation. So this is chair. We will have a chair to show us the problems. We will have we will have Mr. Toy. And when we apply those, we will have Mr. Kong. As you can see, we have a red dot, that's Mr. Problem. and we will have a lot of because they brought the family. But what I'm trying to do here on the presentation, it's also to present a Mr. Solution. So we will show also some steps that if we are looking and taking care of those, probably we'll have some solutions to the problems that we might see on the fields. So here we will talk about the pelvic posture tendencies, and then we will stop. Okay, so for today's presentation, we will just talk about the pelvic posture tendencies because this is, as I told you, a pretty massive presentation. Those are the topics that we will talk on this part. So pelvic posture tendencies, hip belt angles, chain of events, trunk posture tendencies, 3 critical angles, 3 points of contact, that's for the next part, and then the cervical posture tendencies and primitive reflexes for the last part of the presentation. So about the first one. So usually when we are talking about postures, I'm highlighting 4, those are the most common ones. They are not all of them, but those are the most common ones that we can see on the field. It's going to be posterior pelvic tilt, anterior pelvic tilt, pelvic obliquity, and pelvic rotation. So I split it, the obliquity and the rotation, and we will look a little bit deeper inside of each of them. But most of the times they are combined. Most of the times when we have a pelvic obliquity, we also have a pelvic rotation, okay? So for the posterior pelvic tilts, so what is bringing us to that type of positioning? So usually we have an exaggerated seat depth. This is pretty common when we get this type of posture, is because the product that they are using, it's too deep for them. Foot support very high or low, or too far forward with short arm swings. Also might be one of the reasons for the posterior pelvic tilts. Other reason might be floor seat height too high for foot propulsion. I don't have a lot of clients doing the propelling with their feet, but I have a few. And I learned with the worst experience. So I went to a client, I did the assessment, the full assessment. So we apply a manual base, then a proper cushion, proper back support. Everything was pretty nice. And then the therapist at the end told me, well, this is pretty good, but now he cannot propel the chair because it is too high. Can you just decrease the height? And at that time we couldn't because the one I didn't knew it was for foot propelling. So it was a chair that didn't allow us to do that type of adjustment. So I needed to get back to the office and prepare a new chair with the proper height, already with the cushion, consider everything with the height of the leg of the user to make sure that he was properly seated, but also allowing him to the function of foot propelling. So this is one of the things also to consider. So if the seat is not rigid, a lot of times happens when we are talking about sling seats that they start bending, and when they start to bend, it's pretty common for us to get the posterior pelvic tilt just because of that. They will start sliding, and then they will have this type of posture. So if the back support it's too vertical, if it is too vertical, a lot of times they tend to rotate the pelvis and put themselves on a posterior pelvic tilt also. Arm supports very low. If the arm supports are very low, some of the clients, when they are tired, they try to get their arms on the arm supports, and to do this they have to rotate the pelvis to get on the proper way of putting the arms on the arm supports. Once again, we need to consider that. Support that does not support the posterior iliac crests. So today we are looking for the back supports in a way that this is not only for the back, but the back supports should be also providing and helping the pelvis to be on a proper way for a correct positioning. So nowadays, it's not only a cushion or a belt. We are looking for the three different parts, so cushion, belt, and also back supports to help the pelvis to be on a proper way, preventing the sliding, and also to be on a way that doesn't allow the posterior pelvic tilt. So those are the most common ones. Once again, we might have some more situations like the lack of use of belts or the misuse or even if we are not wearing a belt. But those are the most common ones that we highlight. Then we look for the anterior pelvic tilts. So usually anterior femoral angle. So the knees are lower than the hips. When we have the foot supports too low, it happens if the chair is too big for the user, it happens a lot that they tend to put the feet a little bit more to the back, and they will tend to anteriorize the trunk, so they will have an anterior pelvic tilt. So if the back support is too vertical, instead of rotating the pelvis to accommodate themselves, a lot of times might happen the opposite. So they are sending the trunk to their front, and then they will be on an anterior pelvic tilt. Excessive lumbar support. Some of back supports from factory already bring lumbar support. And if we don't look at it on a proper way, if this is too much excessive, might lead to this posture.
Hi, Luke.
So those are the most common ones. So pelvic obliquity. For pelvic obliquity, a lot of times the wheelchair is too wide. So as you can see, the size of the chair will have a huge impact on the proper positioning of the client. So very low arm support. Some of the times the client is trying to reach with one arm, the arm support. So they are leaning a little bit for one side, and then they are compensating the trunk to be aligned, and we will have a postural scoliosis, but also the pelvis will be obliquous just because of that. So seat does not support ITs, lack or misuse of the cushion, or even if they don't wear a cushion. Seat base too soft. So seat slings, a lot of times when they start to bend, we will have an improper positioning of the pelvis on the sling seat. So those are the most common ones. So pelvic rotation. For the pelvic rotation, a lot of times the trunk is not supported. So lack of use, or we don't have laterals, for example. Sometimes even the deepness of the back support is sufficient to prevent this. But some of the times when we just have a flat back support, for example, might lead for a pelvic rotation also. So back support does not support PSIS, for example. Once again, the back support helping to keep the pelvis on a proper way. If the floor height is too high to propel, once again, they will try to propel and they will rotate the hip to get their feet on the floor, and they will rotate the hip to do it. So those are the most common ones. So some other situations that we might have: subluxation and luxation of the hip. As you can see on the drawing down there, that's a luxation. So a subluxation, it's when the head of the bone doesn't leave the hip totally, it's just partially. That's going to be the subluxation. I'm pretty sure that you already know this. So foot support too high might lead us to this, or lack of lateral pelvic control. One of the things that you can see there on the picture on the left, down left, sometimes the misuse of of an abductor might also lead for a subluxation or even a luxation of the hip. On that particular case that you have there, the abductor, it's not a problem because it's only aligning the legs, and we don't have tone. So in this case, it's not a problem. But when we have high tone and we are not applying properly an abductor, for example, a lot of cases that I had with subluxation and luxation, it was just because of the bad use of the abductor. Windswept. So windswept deformity, when this is totally fixed, it's pretty challenging to apply products on a proper way. When this is flexible, it's going to be much easier for us to apply products, but we need to think also outside from the box, because different strength means different applications of the products. On this windswept case that we have here, I'm going to show you an example of a client. So fabric seat, a lot of times the sling seats leads the clients to have a windswept. Hopefully it's going to be just postural. If the foot support is too high, might lead also for this type of posture, or incorrect positioning of the abductor block combined with a bad positioning of the feet also might lead us to that. Dysmetry of the lower limbs, if they are not accommodated, might also lead us to windswept. And those are the most common ones. As I told you, this is an example of a client that I get with a windswept deformity. This client is from a Portuguese island. This was already a few years ago. When I get the client first time, he was seated on this manual chair, as you can see there. We have a lot of things happening here. We have a sling seat with no cushion. You can see the depth of the seat, it's too short. We have a back support with a small cushion there, totally bent. So we don't have any type of belts, but at least the good part, everything was flexible, okay? So that's me a few years ago. I was a little bit younger with no white beard yet. And here I'm already looking for the trunk and trying to get some reaction of the user to understand if he was tolerating properly or not the seating system. At this time, I had already stabilized the pelvis on a proper way, and I was just looking for the trunk. Here you can see that I'm looking for one leg, so his left leg, and here I'm applying an abductor belt. So with this type of belt, I'm providing external rotation of the leg. So I'm helping not only the alignment, but I'm also applying a rotation of the leg to help me keep the leg on a proper way. And then when I'm looking for the other leg, I'm looking for an abductor and not a belt, because on this case, I'm trying to align from the outside to inside. So as you can see, different strengths needs are also different. So we need to apply different products for the client. Only then I'm looking for the foot supports, okay? So this is the way that I did this assessment. And you can see the difference between before and after. I think it was pretty different at the end. In terms of tolerance, once again, we kept 1.5 hours with the client seated before, after the assessment, to make sure that everything that we have here and all the things, all the new posture that we had, it was tolerated by the client, okay? Scissor adduction. So scissor adduction, this is also one of the most challenging cases that we have here. Most of the times they happen because we have a very narrow seat, a very short seat, inadequate pelvic support. or a support fit too low or too forward. Pelvic control via inadequate belt, if we are using an improper belt, and that happens a lot, might also lead the client to have a scissor adduction, or also inadequate seat or back contour. So those are the most common ones. I don't have any example on this case. I think that's good. Frog legs abduction, sorry. So frog legs abduction, once again, depending if this is flexible, partially flexible or fixed, might be pretty easy or pretty challenging. When we have a fixed positioning on this frog legs abduction, all the clients that I get with this, they had the need for a molded seat. And to be honest, if they have some type of function to drive the chair, most of the times we have problems with doors and the small places, just because the legs need to be constantly open, and that's a huge challenging for the products. So if the foot support is too high, might lead us to the frog legs abduction, and usually this is postural, so it's pretty easy to solve. Lack of adequate support in the lower limbs, those are the most common ones. And this is it for the pelvic posture tendencies. So the first part of the presentation, and this is divided in 3 parts, ends now. If you have any type of question or doubt about the presentation, I will ask you now to open your mics, your microphones, so we can chat a little bit. If you have some cases or some challengings that you want to share, I will tell you, please open the microphones and let's just chat a little bit, okay? So no questions.
And I know you guys don't do sleep systems, but it's a part of our product range. It's it's the difference between the seating and the line. Obviously, they're 2 different positions, but it's yeah, just the laws of levers are greatly taken out of in sleep systems. Well, unless they're lying, well, when they're lying on their sides, but it's just interesting the 2 comparisons between the 2. I find line positioning a lot easier to manage because of just the laws of levers and forces that come into play, and gravity is affecting in both line and seating, obviously, but it's the laws of levers that really have the effect in the seating. That you're addressing the pelvis first. You often hear people talking about the bowling pin on top of the pin of the spine and the head. Those differences. It always amazes me that it's the laws of levers.
It's one of the things, when I was working on the field, one of the things that it was pretty common talking with the therapists, and most of the times with PTs, with physical therapists, it was that they were doing a lot of times like 1, 2, or 3 hours of a positioning or some treatment with the client, for example. And then they were losing totally the work that they did with the client just because the seating system was not helping, So they were doing 3 hours of physical therapy with the clients, and then they seated the client on an improper product. And that led me also to consider the bad positioning when they are laying down at night to have a 24-hour proper positioning. So I did some, to be honest. We had some products at the time. It was pretty challenging for us because at least at that time when we were in the beginning of the laying down positioning here in Portugal, And it was a pretty challenging way of looking to the products, not only because of the price, but because of the work that caregivers and parents had to do to properly use the products, you know. But we managed to do it properly. And nowadays, it's one of the things that when we began, it was a huge challenge. And now it's one of the things that we have here from the basis. So now the dealer that we have here in Portugal, they are doing the assessment with the PT and OT and speech and physical therapy and the doctors. But then they are constantly going to the home of the clients to do the assessment on the bed also, to keep the positioning during the night. And we can see a lot of differences now with a certain amount of clients that they kept being pretty much well managed on a sitting way, just because they have a 24 hours proper positioning. And it's brilliant that you are talking about that, because it's really important to make sure that after the daily based activities, they will have something else to do on the home that will allow them to be properly positioned. You know, that's awesome. That's good to know.
There's a couple of chat have come in there, Adner. If you wanna have a look at the chat.
If I will circulate the presentation, yes, I will. So I'm saving this presentation. I will save all the presentations, and later on, I will share the PowerPoint and also the link for this presentation that we are doing here. Okay. So this is the first question that I have. Then I have here, is there a risk of putting stress on ligaments when you try to correct posture, especially if they have been seated incorrectly for an extended period of them, in which the muscles and tendons shortened? Basically, how are we ensuring the service user or patient who has an intellectual has a disability with no communication? Okay, so first of all, you are totally right. This is not okay, we got now the solution for everything. No, we don't. Most of the times with clients with no communication, we try to look for physical expressions, obviously. When we are trying to do the assessment, when we are trying to move a segment, for example, like an arm, a leg already a little bit with some shortened tendons, for example, we need always to make sure that we are looking for the expression of the clients, to make sure that they are not getting pain or reacting to the movements. And that happens with all of the clients that we are working. When we don't have any sensitivity, that's a problem, because we don't know. We are moving and we don't see a reaction. So how much can we stretch? Obviously, it's going to be like a middle, it's going to be like the common sense. We need to look at it and see, okay, we already have a shortened arm. Will I try to extend it totally? No, obviously not. I will try to see how much can I do it, how much can I stretch it, and start doing it on a daily basis if possible. A lot of time that happened for me with legs, for example. I used to work with body point foot supports. For some reason, they stopped working with it. They stopped producing the foot supports. But I had a lot of clients with short, already some shortened tendons on the popliteal area. And if they didn't have any surgery already scheduled, I was trying, some of the times I was applying the foot supports inside of the angle of the base. And then slowly we were starting increasing the angle, obviously on the proper way with clients after a while. And we had some nice results. But as you are saying here, we need to be constantly monitoring expressions and discomfort and so on. Mostly on the cases that they don't have much sensitivity. Okay, if they have sensitivity, you can see their reaction when you are doing already the assessments. If you are stretching too much, they will give you an expression like they will do something, and you will see. Okay, if they don't complain verbally, you can see obviously on their face expressions. So I hope this answered, but if it didn't, let me know. Okay.
I would just, I would agree, Adner, that again, it's back to what you said about your supine and seated assessment. You have to respect the body. If there is a limitation somewhere, that has to be accommodated into the seating system. If we're not in the business of stretching people. Well, seating is not a therapy. It should be there for comfort. And it's not there as a torture device either for strapping somebody down to a chair and expecting that we're going to get perfect 90 sitting. None of us sit it like that either. But yeah, it's back to the assessment. There's many courses and classes out there that are people will help with to identify or help you to identifying the limitations of people's assessments. I think Sharon is actually on here. The Sharon Sutherland does a lot of training in that on the hands-on assessment as well. So again, it's just back to that hands-on assessment. You got to feel it, you got to see it.
Yeah, exactly that.
Sorry, Adner, I just had a quick question.
Yeah, of course.
I have a client who is end-stage Huntington's disease. He's sitting in a seating matter Sorrento at the moment. That's his comfort chair. He had previously been provided or prescribed by another OT a molded chair, which is no longer suitable according to staff, because he now has a rotation at his shoulder. He's rotated at his pelvis and has a windswept posture also, and his neck is flexed. So they're just a wee bit worried about him slipping out of the chair. And as it's coming into summer, we would like to get him outside for quality of life purposes and participation in outdoor activities. Also for the family as well, as they don't know how long obviously he'll be with us. I was just wondering, in terms of a wheelchair for outside, would I likely need to be looking at getting him reassessed for a new molded seat, or is there anything in your experience you would look at otherwise?
Okay, so there are, depending on the deformities. Okay.
Yes.
So usually we already have some products that allows us to do some molds on a way that if it change on the future, you can just replace that on a cheap way, on an easy way, but not expensive. Okay. Today, for example, you may just do the mold with the client on the system already. You just do the molds, and when you are doing the assessment on a back support that has already the foam inside, and you are just adding the molds to the foam, and later on, if you just need, you just remove the molds and you do a new one, or you change that. You can just open a little bit more because it's foam, okay, that you do on that time.
Do you mean something like a Sideo backrest?
It's not air, it's going to be foam, medical foam. This is a chemical reaction. So we are mixing 3 different products on a bowl, and we are mixing it, and we are just applying that to the back support with client already seated. So we have a bag on the back support. We apply that liquid, and in 5 minutes, the liquid will transform in a medicinal foam. Okay. So that one, it will accumulate the back support to the client itself, and it's gonna put all the areas in contact with the back support. If the deformity, it's not huge, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Okay, so obviously you need to think on the system. I always look at belts on a way that if you know how to properly apply a belt, it might be half of the work right there. Okay.
Yes.
Obviously, if you are applying a belt, you need a cushion because the help will always increase a little bit the pressure of the client. We will talk about angles here on the presentation on the next one.
Okay.
It's pretty important to understand how to properly assemble a belt to make sure that the pelvis will be not fixed. So it will still have some movements, not allowing to go to a bad posture. Okay. So most of the times a proper belt will be half of the work when you are looking for a seating system. So accordingly to that, you need to make sure what is the range of movements. Do you have some flexibility or not?
No,
Do you
not
have,
at the moment.
okay, so everything is fixed. So,
Yes.
so you need to accumulate. Make
Yes.
sure that it will not increase even higher, okay? But that you will have enough stabilization so it will not move to slide, for example, or to lose the trunk posture to an even worse one.
Yes.
But today you have products that allow you to do molding seats without to be a complete molded seat. Okay.
Yes.
I just add to that as well, Paddy, that it depends on your base wise there. If the client is in full-time nursing care, if they are looking, if the family want to take the client out and about for in mobility sense, or is it just, as you say, just the summer months are coming, if he's that closer to end stage, he may not be able to tolerate out and about for too long. If we've supplied molded seats into the likes of Sorrento seats as well, the full, by the sounds of it, there's quite a limitations going on there as well. So a full mold can be, you don't have to go for a new base. If it is just they're going on to the Sorrento base or something like that, you just take the seating out of that and you can put a molded seat into one of those systems. So yeah, that also might be an option, just depending on if they need to go into transport. Obviously, the Sorrento then wouldn't be able to go into transport.
Yeah, so it would be for transport purposes and just getting outside of the nursing facility.
Okay, well then, yeah, then you're definitely going to have to look at it. There's many different bases out there, but yeah, as Adner says, and it's it's just accommodating the shape and if he is depending on on end stages, it's whether it's you're going to give a little bit on positioning and just make him make your client as as comfortable as possible, and just giving them that opportunity to get out and interact then as well with family and so on.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So, any other questions? I don't think so. So thank you so much for your attendance here, and we will do the second part next week. Okay, hopefully. So thank you so much for everything. Okay.
Anders, thank you very much for your time today, guys. Also, thank you all for your time today. Again, if there's anybody else who wants to have a bit of a chat there, feel free. Our guys are all available to yourselves as well. Yeah, as Adner says, it has been recorded. Anybody wants a link for the presentation today, there, just drop us a line and we'll get the link sent to you. No problem at all. And yeah, as I say, Adler says we have another couple of sessions booked in, and we'll be looking at those in the coming weeks. So thank you very much. Chat to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.